Good morning, everybody. My name is Phil Ike, and joining me this morning is Tom Miller. He's the Executive Vice President of Saginaw Future. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
I am excited to talk to you about RRC, but before we talk about RRC, let's talk a little bit about Saginaw. So describe Saginaw to me like I'm somebody who has never been there before.
Well, that's a loaded question. Saginaw is, a county sort of in the middle of the Lower Peninsula. We're a community that, like a lot of other counties in Michigan, has a central urban hub. The city of Saginaw is the county seat and sort of the largest city in Region 5 or the Great Lakes Bay region. And it's I was born and raised here, grew up here, went away to college, and made a conscious decision to move back to the area because I love Saginaw. And it's a community that has gone through a lot of historical changes economically, like a lot of other communities up and down the I-75 corridor. Started as many years ago as a fur trading outpost, then transitioned into a lumber community. And then when the lumber had been mined out, transitioned into an automotive community. And, post-recession 2009, the economy has continued to sort of evolve into a pretty diverse various sectors of the economy. Saginaw is a community of around 50,000 people, and it's got the Saginaw River that runs through it, one of the only, as I understand it, one of the only rivers that runs north in the world, which empties out into the Saginaw Bay. So a lot of natural resources that we have in the area. And I grew up in the city of Saginaw. When I moved back into the city of Saginaw, and it's it's a special place for me.
Yeah, it's a special place to a lot of folks. You've been with Saginaw Future for 20 years now. First, congratulations. Is it officially 20, did you say?
Well, April 20th, April 18th, April 20th of 2007, I started.
Okay.
No, 2004, 2004.
Awesome. So you were part of Saginaw Future at the very beginning of starting the RRC process. And tell me a little bit about what needs you saw in the community and why you ended up going the direction of the certification.
Yeah, and I think really the first sort of introduction I had to RRC was a recommendation from the MEDC. They were really rolling out this concept, and they presented it to, I think, all of the communities in Michigan, and they had signaled that they were going to align some of their incentives and programs around RRC. So it was strongly suggested that we consider the program. And I've been going to city council meetings for close to 20 years, every city council meeting. And we meet with the city manager. So Saginaw is a strong city manager form of government. So professionally run by the city manager with council setting policies and the direction for the city. And so I've seen over the 20 years really the evolution of council, the manager's position, administration. And you do over a period of time in history in viewing those things, you do recognize sort of some challenges and opportunities to streamline processes specifically related to development. And I think that's really what speaks to the RRC process. When you initially, you mentioned what advice do you have for folks, and we'll get to that in a bit. But initially, when you look at the RRC process and recommendation, can be daunting. You look at the list of the things that you're working on, and all of your processes and procedures and permits and website review and zoning changes. Um, and really, the city has a pretty small staff given the size of the community. And I remember it was just Yolanda Jones, who's the budget director for the city, and she's incredibly smart and gifted. I mean, she is she's excellent at her job and really is invaluable to the city. But I remember it was just her and I think Vicki Davis from the city, from the manager's office. We're sitting in her office looking at this list of RRC and thought, oh boy, how do we proceed? How are we going to tackle this challenge? But ultimately, like a lot of things, when you look back on after you've accomplished something, it was an incredibly rewarding and I think necessary process that we went through.
That's really been the consistent thread in all of these conversations is we are we're a small staff for the city. We have so much work to do, so many challenges. We know that we need to do this part of our community better. And then you look at the to-do list and you're like, oh my gosh, well,
Mhm.
how am I going to pull this off? But I think similar to like the Michigan Main Street program, and it's an involved process because it's worth it at the end. It would be busy, mindless busy work if it was just easy. And at the end of 6 months, you get your little trophy in the mail, like here's your certification. But nothing has really changed. Like the codes aren't better, more development isn't happening because it's not more streamlined. There hasn't been any change. And so I love your point that at the beginning, it's going to look hard. It's going to look, how are we going to do all this? But at the end, you're going to look back and say, I am so glad that we went through this process.
Yeah, and I mean it's just as simple as, um, when I'm meeting with a prospect or a developer or somebody that wants to convert an old, um, historic building to a new mixed use project, it was as simple as trying to go on the city's website and find a permit or a schedule for the historic district commission. I'm as I'm as involved as anybody um, in those type of activities, and if I struggle to really access information, it really speaks to somebody coming from outside the community or even within the community, being frustrated about the process and the inability to just simply access information. So it's really just about kind of stepping back out of the day to day, which we are all involved in, and taking a fresh perspective on all aspects of the city's operation in terms of development, and really looking at best practices to make things easier
Mm,
for
yeah.
everyone.
When maybe let's talk about that process then a little bit, since we've kind of set set folks up and say it's going to look scary, but don't worry about it. What Looking back on it, what were the keys? First, how long did that process take you? And then what were the keys in your mind in actually accomplishing something that you said, hey, this looks pretty intimidating?
Yeah, and I think it took us a couple of years. I think it took us longer than maybe your typical municipality. And I guess looking back on that, I would attribute that to we didn't have a lot of the necessary plans in place
Mm,
to fulfill the RRC obligations. Um, when you talk about um, cities in Michigan that are challenged from a budgetary standpoint, sometimes planning is one of the first things that isn't funded completely.
hmm
So cities' obligations to update their master plan, to have a housing study complete, those are expensive endeavors, and you have to hire consultants, professional consultants with the wherewithal to finish those studies. And so we really started from scratch, and had to update a lot of those just sort of institutional sort of documents that hadn't been dusted off for a long time,
Mm.
and really, frankly, needed to be. I mean, a lot of things have changed in 20 years, and the world is different post 2009 recession, post COVID. And if you're not using those documents as a living document and amending those regularly, they quickly become out of date. I'm still, even to this day, last Friday, um, we're still involved in a zoning rewrite, which is a function of the RRC process. They really took a look at our master plan, which has been updated and is a lot more usable than the previous document. But even to this day, we're still working on refining our zoning code to really bring it up to
Mm.
modern standards that are more progressive and
Yeah,
usable.
bringing the codes up to code. I think that's kind of an ancillary benefit of going through the process. Like I think about my house. The one room you throw all your junk in that you're like, man, I really got to clean that out. I really got to clean that out, and you're telling yourself weeks, 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 and then company comes over, and
Right.
that gives you like, here's this thing I know that we needed to do, but I had so many other things that I had to focus on. Here's an extra encouragement to get that done. And so I love that kind of ancillary benefit of RRC process in saying, okay, these things, these kind of fundamental plans, let's make sure that these are in order so that we can really be successful with this project. As far as like manpower goes, like how did you approach that in um, addressing some of the needs of the process?
Yeah, and I think that's something I was just thinking about as you were speaking. The city didn't have a planning and development department at the time. It had, of course, inspections department, which handled the planning commission, but they didn't have dedicated staff that were really um, dedicated to those kind of responsibilities. And I think you will find that in other municipalities. This really the RRC sort of work that needed to be done didn't really fall in any one particular department.
Mm.
Um, and in communities with more resources, they have maybe a couple to several staff dedicated to planning. But in communities that have that struggle with their general fund budget, they didn't have that. And thanks and credit to the city manager, um, Tim Morales, who has really done a wonderful job managing the city's finances, and been very progressive in his thinking. Since RRC, and really what grew out of RRC, is they now have two planning staff in that department, created or reconstituted that department and brought that function back to the city. It's really important, but sometimes when municipal budgets struggle, they have to strip down their operations to the most basic functions.
Mhm.
Um, and oftentimes parks and recreation or planning, some of those are, you know, I don't want to say they're not necessary. Of course, they're hugely important to have a great community, but things like having your water running and your taxes collected and those kinds of things are they have to be done. So Tim has done a really good job of bringing that function back to the city, and that really grew out of the RRC review.
I love what you're saying here because it echoes the experience of so many of our communities, and we don't have the capacity we really should in order to run a community, or the resources that we need, or XYZ. And so heading into something like this, it can it can really be easy to say we'll address that later when we do have the capacity to increase our capacity. But your example, I think, is so great because out of this process, you now have a greater capacity at that government level. You're more functional. You're addressing planning, whereas before it was like we know we need to do that, but we can't do that right now. And I think that Saginaw is not alone in that. You go to a town of 1,000 to a town of 100,000, and everybody's going to be saying similar things. But going through this process, the gift is a streamlined process, higher capacity, more knowledge. The developers that are like, hey, what about Saginaw? There's more of a red carpet rolled out, more encouraging to them because the information they need is easier to find. Looking back on the process now, are there any other ways that you want to point out that how Saginaw has benefited or the organizations involved have benefited from going through this process?
Yeah, I really think it just sort of changed the mindset. Um, I think, and we work with all communities throughout Saginaw County. We represent the entire county, and so we work with probably 16 to 18 additional municipalities on different projects, and both the city and the county, representing the largest. But I think sometimes there's a tendency for all of us to just look internally at sort of our operations and the way that we sort of structure the work that we do. And I really think the RRC was sort of a change in mindset and culture
Mm.
for the applicable departments that were involved. We're all sort of inward facing because we all have day jobs, we all have roles and responsibilities that we're in charge of, and metrics to meet, and deadlines to deliver on. But I think from a broader perspective, even things as seemingly silly as the website design. Um, it's not a very exciting thing to redesign a website, especially a municipal website.
Mhm.
Maybe if you're selling really cool sneakers or some sort of apparel brand, but municipal websites, by their very nature, are not very exciting. Um, but it is, in many cases, both website design and social media, which you've helped us out with. It's really sort of the front door for the excuse me, any municipality that that most of the public, that may be their first view of the city when they're trying to seek information. So even just getting the technical services department, Jeff Klopsick runs the department for the city, and he was gung ho. He said, "Yeah, I mean, I don't want to have a boring municipal website," and he sort of inherited that over time.
Mhm.
And you go to the city's website today, and it just looks fresh and inviting. We did a little art project. Um, we have a little art group that we meet and work on projects, and one of the projects was a municipal sculpture that spelled out Saginaw, and they use the designs of the letters as their tabs to enter into
Mhm.
different departments. And it's just it's sort of refreshing. It's easy to navigate, it's easy to find things, it's easy to find contact individuals. And the city really had zero, next to zero, social media presence before the RRC process started. And I think, again, one of the unintended consequences of sort of looking outside the four walls of City Hall and being more forward facing or outside facing was engagement with you all about in your group with social media, and just really getting the good news and messages and stories out there to the public. So I think it really did change for the departments it touched. Um, Sort of the culture around what municipal government's
Mhm.
mission is for its citizens.
It's so great because everything everything stems from the culture. Like you can't transcend your culture. You can't like if I feel poorly about myself, it's really hard to say I feel great about myself. Like it just doesn't work that way. And so that idea of yes, it's functional in a lot of ways, but it's also really changing the fabric of who we see ourselves as and what we can be and what our potential is, and that's really where it starts. If a similar community is watching this or listening to this, and they've been thinking about the RSC process and getting the certification, but they haven't quite jumped in with both feet, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say just, dip your toes into the water. Um, there really isn't any demanding time. I mean, there are timelines, but you don't have to, you know, do the whole thing all in one sitting. It is going to take time. And it is scary when you first look at the requirements. But, I think they should reach out to other folks that have gone through the process. Um, and just, it's like a project that's really difficult and you can't see the end. You can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Sometimes you just have to start, and just start small. Just take a piece, something that's been an issue or an annoyance for you in your own job, sitting, in a municipal position. Geez, we would really like to update our website, or we would really like to take a look at our zoning code, or we would really like to. One of the things that I really enjoyed was identifying priority redevelopment ready sites. Um, Ironically, I just had a call from two individuals yesterday, prospective developers, one from outside the area but with ties to Saginaw, and one who grew up in Saginaw but went away to a successful career and came back to Saginaw recently, who both mentioned RRC shovel ready sites.
Mm.
Um, and so, just the process of take one piece of the RRC, whatever that is, and if it's identifying, geez, we've got this really beautiful um, building on the corner of our main street, but it's been vacant for 20 years and the bricks are starting to crumble a little bit, or the tuck pointing is needs some attention. Engage with the MEDC. They have resources to assist, and just start somewhere. Take one piece, and you just have to start the process.
Step by step, bit by bit. Well,
That's
Tom,
right.
I want to thank you so much for your time today. Of course, I'm cheering Saginaw on. Can't wait to see what you guys have in store in the future. I've been talking with Tom Miller. He's the executive vice president of Saginaw Future. Tom, thank you so much.
Thanks, Phil.